your imagined ideal. So, while this is theoretically a book about revision, it's also a step-by-step guide to writing a novel. And because I believe rewriting and revision necessarily occur at every stage of the process, I've organized this guide into 3 large chapters, each devoted to one of what I think of as the 3 drafts. You might be listening to this book with a blank page in front of you, or with a partial draft already underway. In either case, you can employ the tactics in the first draft chapter to practice generative revision, the kind of rewriting that will help you continue drafting and eventually finish the first version of your novel. This is where you'll find tactics for sustaining and extending your story, and for overcoming common roadblocks and frustrations. At this stage, I advocate an exploratory, organic, and above all playful approach. Not because it's the only way to draft a novel, but because it's the most enjoyable way I know how. When I finished the earliest draft of what would become my first published novel, I realized I didn't know how to approach improving so much material at once. The strategies in the second draft chapter emerged from my need to shape the rough, unwieldy material of a first draft toward a better-made, better-plotted second, which I did by a process I'd call narrative revision, because the big decisions you'll make during this draft will be about how to restructure and rewrite the dramatic material of the story to maximal effect. In many ways, this is the hardest turn to make, but it's also one of the more fulfilling parts of the process, as it's the stage where you'll make the most significant improvements to your plot, transforming your novel from draft to book. In the third draft chapter, you'll find a layered approach to final edits, where you'll ensure by a series of smaller and more workable tasks that your now well-structured, well-plotted book is as enjoyable as possible. You can think of this stage as polishing revision, but you might plan to make dramatic changes here too. You may already have noticed that this first draft, second draft, third draft structure is rather tidy. These drafts might be easier to think of as stages, with the understanding that you might linger in one stage for a long time and then breeze through another. You might also return to a previous stage's strategies at any time, or repeat a stage more than once if necessary. More than likely, at certain points in the work, you'll find yourself employing strategies from all 3 stages at once. Because of this, there's no one right way to use this book. If you're starting from scratch, you might move through this book in a linear fashion, but I hope you'll also feel free to try the revision tactics ahead in whatever order you wish, adapting my process to yours. Take only what's useful. The novel writing process described in this book is a version of my own, and therefore it necessarily proceeds from my personal preferences regarding craft, audience, and story. It also most likely recreates my blind spots, although I've done my best to address those where I can. One goal of all good teachers has to be not to pass on their own lacks to their students. While my own novels have been promoted as literary fiction of the speculative, genre-hopping variety, my interests as a reader and a student of craft are more varied and wide-ranging, and I hope are getting more so every year. I worked at a small publishing house for several years where I edited novels by writers working in a variety of styles, and for the past decade, I've been teaching novel writing to students with unique goals, aesthetics, and intended audiences, all of which I try my best to honor and encourage in our working together. All this is only to say that while I believe much of what I suggest ahead will work for many different kinds of fiction writers, it's more than okay if certain tactics or techniques don't work for you or feel at cross purposes with the kind of novel you want to write. The aim of this book isn't to make anyone into the kind of novelist I am, anything but that, but to help you become more yourself on the page and throughout your process. So, if some of the forthcoming advice doesn't feel like it applies to your novel, go ahead and discard what doesn't help, or better yet, subvert it. There's as much to be gained by actively opposing a craft lesson as there is in following it. This book is here to serve you and your book. Only what's useful to you applies. First draft. Forward progress, generative revision. Now that we're ready to begin, you might ask, what kind of first draft am I suggesting you should write? The quick answer, whatever kind you can. Whatever gets...
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.